Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today we're tackling something I think a lot of you listening will probably recognize if you're learning or using English. You know that feeling. You've got the grammar, mostly you know the words, but then you go to speak and nothing. Or, well, it's like wading through treacle. Your brain just seems to freeze up, kind of second guessing everything before you even say it. It's this like mental wall, this overthinking trap.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly common. That little editor in your head just goes into overdrive. And suddenly speaking feels less like talking and more like taking an exam in real time.
Exactly.
So,
An exam you didn't prepare for. So, for this deep dive, we've looked at the sources you sent us, all focusing on this exact issue, how to speak English without all that mental clutter. Our goal here is to kind of unpack why it happens based on what the sources say, how it messes with your fluency, and crucially, give you some really practical strategies, things you can actually do drawn from these sources to help you break free, to speak more naturally, more spontaneously, moving towards actually thinking in English.
right. So maybe let's start by trying to pin down what we mean by overthinking here. One source described it as the moment your cognitive load shifts from message creation to linguistic scrutiny, which is a fancy way of saying instead of thinking about what you want to communicate,
Yeah.
your brain gets totally hung up on how to say it perfectly, the grammar, the right word, getting the pronunciation spot on.
Right. It's like trying to drive, but constantly checking the engine manual instead of the road. You
Oh,
just seize up. And the sources seem to agree this focus on the mechanics, it's just a massive fluency killer.
totally. Source A, I think it was, points out that hesitation, that pause, the it's often the most obvious sign someone's translating in their head or correcting themselves before they speak.
So the hesitation isn't just awkwardness, it's actually a symptom. It shows that overthinking machine whirring away inside.
Exactly.
Okay, so that internal judge, the constant translation, that's the core problem. But why? Why do we get stuck in that loop? What makes us analyze everything so much?
Well, the sources highlight a few main drivers. Probably the biggest one, mentioned pretty much everywhere, is just fear. Fear of making mistakes. Source B really dug into this, calling it a fear of negative evaluation.
Yeah.
Basically, you're worried about what others will think if you mess up grammar or say a word wrong.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah, you feel really exposed, like everyone's grading you.
Precisely. And tied into that, another source, source C, I believe, talks about the perfectionist trap.
Mm.
It's not just worrying about others, it's also this internal pressure, wanting to sound, flawless, like a textbook.
Ah, right. Setting the bar impossibly high for yourself, so any little slip feels like a total failure.
Exactly. Makes speaking feel incredibly high stakes.
So fear of judgment from outside and this perfectionism pushing from inside. What else? Is there more?
Yeah. Source D brought up the habit of thinking in your native language first and then translating everything across. If your default process is always thought in language A, translate word by word, attempt English sentence,
Hmm.
well, that's inherently slow. And it forces you to constantly analyze, search for the right words, apply grammar rules consciously.
That translation loop again adds a whole extra step, doesn't it? Okay, so fear, perfectionism, and translating in your head. Those seem to be the main culprits, according to the sources.
That's what they suggest, yeah. And recognizing them is kind of the first step because the solutions offered really target these specific things.
Okay, good. Let's pivot then. We know the problem. We know the roots. What do the sources suggest we actually do about it? What are the techniques to sort of retrain our brains?
Well, a really fundamental idea echoed in several sources is focusing more on quantity over quality, especially when you're practicing. Hayes basically says, just get the message out. Don't obsess over perfect grammar right away. Build momentum first.
That makes sense. Silence the inner critic long enough to actually build the speaking habit. So what specific methods do they suggest for that?
Free talking is a big one. Source B talks about this. It's literally just speaking out loud in English for maybe 5 or 10 minutes without stopping, without planning. Just keep the words flowing.
Even if it's nonsense.
Even if it's messy. If you can't find a word, describe it. If the grammar's wonky, let it go for now. The goal is just continuous output, stopping that pause and edit cycle.
Okay, like practicing speaking without hitting the brakes constantly. Training wheels for spontaneity, maybe?
Exactly. Then there's shadowing, which source C discusses. This is a bit different. You listen to a native speaker say from a podcast clip or something, and you repeat what they say almost at the same time, right after them.
Ah, yeah, I've heard of that. So you're not thinking about forming sentences yourself.
Right. You're trying to mimic their rhythm, their intonation, their speed. It kind of forces you into the natural flow of English.
Source C mentioned it helps bypass that conscious translation process, right? Gets your mouth and brain working together more instinctively.
Precisely. And another really key technique, Source D went into this, is chunking. This means learning and using common phrases or expressions as single blocks rather than building sentences word by tiny word.
Like learning, get the hang of it, or for the time being as one unit.
Exactly. Or kinda, sort of, believe it or not. Things people say all the time.
So instead of constructing, I am starting to understand, oh, you just pull out the chunk, I'm getting the hang of it, much faster, less analysis needed.
Much faster. Source D actually listed quite a few useful chunks, reduces the mental load significantly, and, oh, Source E mentioned mental rehearsal.
How does that work?
Just before a situation where you might need to speak, maybe a meeting, or even just ordering coffee, you run through it in your head. Not scripting it perfectly, but just imagining the scenario, thinking about key phrases you might use.
Okay, so it makes the real situation feel a bit less sudden, less pressure. Helps you access the language quicker when it counts.
Exactly. And naturally, all the sources stressed that nothing beats actual real-time conversation. Using these techniques in conversations, even really simple ones.
Right, that's the ultimate training ground, forces you to react.
Yep.
Okay, so the sources seem to lay out a path. Practice techniques like free talking, shadowing, chunking, mental rehearsal. Do them consistently. And that helps break down the fear and the overanalysis for real conversations.
It's about slowly making it more automatic, less analytical.
Now, the big question for many people listening, finding dedicated practice time is hard, you know? How do the sources suggest weaving this into just normal daily life without needing extra hours?
Yeah, that's a great point, and the sources had some really neat ideas here. Source B, for instance, suggested simply narrating your life.
Narrating your life.
Yeah, just as you're doing things, making breakfast, walking somewhere. Just describe it, quietly or in your head, in English. Okay, I'm pouring the water now. It's hot. Adding coffee.
Huh. That's brilliant because it's immediate, it's relevant, and it's super low pressure. The topic is just whatever's happening.
Exactly. And source A suggested describing observations, waiting for a bus, look around, describe the weather, the buildings, the people, just forming those thoughts in English.
Using those little pockets of downtime that we all have. What about things like watching shows or listening to music or podcasts?
Oh, definitely. Source C really pushed for integrating listening with speaking. So listen to something, pause it, and then try to summarize what you just heard in your own words, out loud.
Okay.
Or if you hear a phrase, a chunk, that sounds useful, say it out loud a few times, try and copy how the speaker said it.
Right, so making passive listening more active. You're already doing the listening part anyway.
Precisely. And Source D made a good point about not underestimating simple small talk. You know, greeting someone at work, ordering it the coffee, asking for directions. These are perfect little micro practices for a spontaneous speech. They often use those chunks we talked about.
Yeah, those small interactions. They build confidence, don't they? Little wins.
They really do. And Source E also emphasized just thinking in English, even when you're alone, planning your day, mulling over a problem, reflecting on something. Try doing that internal chat in English.
Ah, so shifting that inner monologue, that directly tackles the translation habit, I guess.
It's probably the most direct way, yeah. It gets your brain used to processing thoughts in English from the start.
Okay, so lots of practical ways then. Narrating actions, describing things, active listening and repeating, using small talk, thinking internally. It's about grabbing those moments throughout the day.
Exactly. Consistent, low-stakes exposure and output. That's what builds the habit and chips away at that need for heavy analysis.
Right. And just before we wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly touch on the payoff. Why go through all this effort? What do the sources say are the main benefits of getting past that overthinking?
Well, the most obvious one we've mentioned is fluency. Just sounding smoother. Source A used a highway analogy, removed the mental traffic jams, and things just flow better. Less hesitation.
And that flow feeds confidence, surely. When you're not constantly getting stuck, you feel more capable, more present.
Absolutely. Source B directly link less overthinking to feeling more effective, more confident in using the language. Plus, it massively improves your ability to actually participate in real conversations. Source C highlighted this. Quicker reactions mean you can keep up, get jokes, jump into discussions, you can properly connect.
Yeah, it stops being a performance and starts being actual communication.
Exactly. And, kind of ironically, letting go of monitoring yourself so intensely can actually make you a better listener.
Really? Oh,
Source D noted that if your brain isn't working overtime checking your own output, you have more mental bandwidth left to properly listen to the other person, catch their nuances, their tone, the real meaning.
huh. That's a fascinating link. Speaking more freely helps you listen better, makes the whole communication thing work better.
Yeah. Ultimately, what all the sources seem to suggest is that speaking without thinking isn't about achieving grammatical perfection on the fly. It's about effective communication.
Yeah.
It's about getting your ideas across, connecting with people, and actually enjoying using the language. It becomes less of a puzzle, more of a tool.
Transforms it from something stressful into something hopefully engaging, so clearer benefits. Fluency, confidence, better interaction, better listening, and just more enjoyable communication overall.
But it is a process, as the sources emphasize. It takes time. It takes that consistent effort, using those techniques, finding those daily moments.
And crucially, remembering that mistakes aren't, well, they're not failures, they're just data.
Yeah.
Feedback, part of how you learn and get more confident. Letting go of that perfectionism is key.
Absolutely. And keep listening. Listening to all sorts of English podcasts, films, conversations helps you absorb those natural patterns, the rhythms, the chunks. That feeds back into your own spontaneous speech.
Definitely. So before we close out, here's a final thought for you to take away, building on that idea of using everyday moments. Think about how much of your day is already filled with routine things, observations, just moments. How many opportunities do you already have right now, today, to practice thinking and speaking in English without carving out extra study time? What possibilities open up if you just start using the moments you already have?
Yeah. How many of those micro practice sessions are hiding in plain sight in your day?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive on speaking English more freely. Keep exploring, keep practicing, and keep speaking.